The sound of poker chips hitting the table made Josephine Zimmer's blood run cold as she stood outside the saloon door, her hands trembling against the weathered wood. It was late September in 1882, and Stockton, California had grown from a rough mining settlement into a bustling hub where fortunes changed hands faster than the autumn wind swept through the valley. She had come looking for her father, knowing in her heart what she would find but praying she was wrong. Through the grimy window, she could see him hunched over a card table, desperation carved into every line of his face as he pushed forward what looked like a piece of paper. Her stomach twisted when she realized it was not money he was betting anymore. "I am calling your bluff, Davies," a rough voice growled from inside. Josephine pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The man speaking wore a black vest over a dirty white shirt, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. This was Samuel Hutchins, a cattle baron who owned half the land between Stockton and Sacramento, and his reputation for cruelty preceded him like a dark cloud. Her father, Thomas Davies, was shaking as he laid down his cards. "Two pair. Nothing special." Hutchins laughed, a sound like gravel grinding together, and spread his cards across the table. "Full house." The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that told Josephine they knew something terrible was happening. "Well now, Davies, seems you have run out of luck and money both," Hutchins said, reaching for the paper her father had pushed forward. "Let us see what you have offered up here." Josephine could not move, could not breathe. She watched her father's shoulders slump in defeat as Hutchins read the document, then began to laugh again, louder this time. "Your daughter, you have wagered your own flesh and blood." Hutchins stood, pocketing the paper. "Boys, it seems I have just acquired myself a new housemaid, or maybe something more entertaining." The casual cruelty in his voice broke Josephine's paralysis. She burst through the saloon doors, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as every head in the room turned toward her. She was 22 years old, with her mother's green eyes and a spine of steel that her father seemed to have misplaced somewhere at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. "Papa, what have you done?" Her voice cut through the smoky air like a knife. Thomas Davies could not meet her eyes. "Josie, I thought I could win it back. You thought wrong," Hutchins interrupted, moving around the table toward her. He was a big man, at least 6 feet tall, with hands that looked like they could break bones without much effort. "But a deal is a deal. You are mine now, girl, bought and paid for, legal as any property transaction." "I am not property," Josephine said, but her voice wavered. In 1882, the law was not always on a woman's side, especially when gambling debts were involved. Her father had signed something, and that signature carried weight whether she liked it or not. "The law says otherwise when your daddy signs you over," Hutchins replied, pulling the deed from his pocket and waving it in front of her face. "You have got until tomorrow morning to gather your things. Then you are coming to my ranch and you will do whatever I tell you to do. Understood?" Before Josephine could respond, the saloon doors opened again. A man walked in, and somehow the entire atmosphere of the room changed. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but clean, a simple blue shirt and brown pants tucked into scuffed boots. What caught Josephine's attention were his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, taking in the scene with an intelligence that made her think he understood exactly what was happening. "Evening, gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. "Seems like I walked in on something interesting." "Nothing that concerns you, Garrett," Hutchins said, but there was an edge to his tone that had not been there before. "Move along." So this was Kenneth Garrett. Josephine had heard the name around town. He was a cowboy who worked various ranches, moving from place to place as work demanded. People said he was honest, hardworking, and skilled with both horses and cattle. They also said he had a past he did not talk about and a code of honor that sometimes got him into trouble. Kenneth's gaze moved to Josephine, then to her father, then to the deed in Hutchins's hand. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That looks like a deed of indenture. Those have not been legal in California for a good while now. This is a gambling debt, fair and square, Hutchins said. Davies here wagered his daughter and I won. That makes it legal. No, Kenneth said simply. That makes it slavery, which California outlawed when it became a state. You cannot own a person, Hutchins, no matter what piece of paper you are waving around. The room went very quiet. Hutchins's face darkened like a thundercloud. You calling me a slaver, Garrett? I am calling you a man who is trying to claim another human being as property, which is exactly what slavery is. Kenneth's hand rested casually near his hip, where Josephine could see the worn grip of a revolver. He was not threatening, not exactly, but the message was clear. Hutchins glanced at the other men in the saloon, calculating. Most of them were looking away, unwilling to get involved. The bartender was studiously polishing a glass. Nobody wanted to stand against Hutchins, but nobody wanted to openly support what he was doing either. Fine, Hutchins said finally. You are so concerned about the girl, let us make this interesting. I will put her deed on the table right now. You got anything worth wagering against it? Kenneth was quiet for a long moment. Josephine held her breath, not sure if she wanted him to accept or walk away. Being traded like a piece of livestock was humiliating, but if Hutchins took her to his ranch, she knew her life would become a nightmare. At least Kenneth Garrett had kind eyes. I've got $600, Kenneth said. Every cent I have saved over the past 3 years. 600, Hutchins laughed. That is barely worth my time. It is more than her father had when you took that deed from him, Kenneth pointed out. 1 hand of poker. You win, you get my money and the girl. I win, I get the deed and you walk away from all of this. Hutchins considered, greed warring with suspicion on his broad face. 1 hand, 5-card draw, and we use a fresh deck. Kenneth nodded and walked to the bar. Josephine watched him count out bills and coins with steady hands, stacking them neatly on the counter before turning back to the table. Her entire future was about to be decided by the turn of cards, and there was nothing she could do but watch and pray. The other men at the table cleared out quickly, not wanting any part of what was coming. Hutchins took his seat, and Kenneth sat across from him. The bartender brought a sealed deck of cards, opened it, and spread them across the table to show they were unmarked before gathering them up and shuffling thoroughly. Cut the deck, Garrett, Hutchins said. Kenneth cut the deck cleanly. The bartender dealt 5 cards to each man, his movements precise and professional. Josephine moved closer without realizing it, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Hutchins picked up his cards, studied them, and smiled. It was not a nice smile. How many cards you want, Garrett? 2, Kenneth said, discarding and receiving his new cards with the same calm expression he had worn since entering the saloon. If he was nervous, it did not show. I will take 1, Hutchins said. The bartender dealt him a single card, and Hutchins's smile grew wider. Your move, Cowboy. Kenneth laid his cards down carefully. Straight. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hutchins started to laugh, then began laying down his own cards. 4 of a kind. Jacks. Looks like the girl is— Wait, the bartender said sharply. Everyone froze. He pointed to one of Hutchins's cards, a jack of spades that looked slightly different from the others. That card is not from this deck. What are you talking about? Hutchins demanded, but his face had gone pale. The bartender picked up the card and held it to the light. See the pattern on the back. Different manufacturer. You switched it in when you drew. I saw the move, but I wanted to be sure." The room erupted. Men who had been silent moments before started shouting. Hutchins was on his feet, his chair crashing backward. "You are lying." I saw it too," one of the men from the previous poker game said. "When you picked up your cards, you palmed something. I thought I was seeing things, but the bartender is right." Kenneth stood slowly, gathering the money from the bar and picking up the deed that had fallen to the floor in the commotion. He tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall like snow. "The game is over, Hutchins," he said quietly. "And you are going to walk out of here right now and never come near Miss Davies again. Because if you do, I will make sure everyone from here to Sacramento knows you are a card cheat who tried to steal a woman through fraud. Your reputation will be worth less than dirt." For a moment, Josephine thought Hutchins was going to go for his gun. Violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Hutchins seemed to deflate, realizing he had no support in the room. Everyone had seen the evidence of his cheating. "This is not over, Garrett," he said, but he was already backing toward the door. "Yes, it is," Kenneth replied. He did not raise his voice, but the certainty in it made Hutchins flinch. After Hutchins left, the saloon slowly returned to its normal noise level, though everyone kept glancing at Kenneth and Josephine. She realized she was shaking, the reality of what had almost happened crashing over her like a wave. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for what you just did." Kenneth looked at her father, who was still slumped at the table, and his expression hardened. "You can start by getting out of this saloon and away from a man who would trade his own daughter for a poker pot." Thomas Davies flinched but said nothing. Josephine felt a complicated tangle of emotions toward her father. He had been a good man once, before her mother died of fever 2 years ago. The grief had hollowed him out, filled the empty spaces with whiskey and desperation. She had tried to help him, tried to pull him back from the edge, but tonight he had proven that her efforts were not enough. "I have nowhere to go," she said softly. They lived in a small rented room above the general store, but the rent was weeks overdue. Without her father's income, meager as it was, she would be evicted within days. Kenneth ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested he was trying to figure out a problem. "I am heading to the McGraw Ranch tomorrow morning. They need help with the fall cattle drive, and the job comes with room and board. The ranch owner's wife, Clara McGraw, has been looking for someone to help with the cooking and the housework. It is hard work, but it is honest, and you would have a place to stay. You would do that for me." "After everything you have already done." Josephine felt tears prickling at her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I cannot leave you here," Kenneth said simply. "Not with Hutchins still around and your father in no condition to protect you. Besides, I think you are stronger than you know. You came into this saloon to face down all of this instead of running away. That takes courage." Josephine looked at her father one last time. Part of her wanted to stay, to keep trying to save him from himself. But a larger part, the part that had stood outside that saloon window and watched him gamble away her freedom, knew that she could not save someone who did not want to be saved. "I will take the job," she said, "and I will work hard to earn my keep." Kenneth nodded. "Meet me at the stable at dawn. We have got a full day's ride ahead of us." That night, Josephine packed her few belongings into a carpet bag her mother had brought from Boston years ago. She left most of her father's things in the room, taking only a daguerreotype of her mother and a quilt her grandmother had made. She did not sleep, listening to her father's drunken snoring from his cot and wondering if she would ever see him again. When the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, she was waiting at the stable. Kenneth arrived shortly after, leading 2 horses. One was a sturdy bay gelding that he rode, and the other was a gentler chestnut mare. "This is Rosie," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She is borrowed from the livery for the trip, but she has got a sweet temperament. Ever ridden before?" "Not much," Josephine admitted. "My mother taught me the basics when I was young, but we sold our horse after she died." Kenneth helped her secure her bag to the saddle, then showed her how to mount properly. His hands were careful and respectful when he helped her, never lingering or presuming. Once she was settled, he swung onto his own horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. They rode out of Stockton as the town was waking up. Josephine looked back once, seeing the familiar buildings and dusty streets that had been her world for the past 5 years. She did not know what lay ahead, but it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The ride to McGraw Ranch took them northeast into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The landscape changed gradually, the flat valley giving way to rolling hills covered in golden grass and scattered oak trees. Kenneth set a steady pace, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and share water from his canteen. "How long have you been working ranches?" Josephine asked during one of these stops. They were sitting in the shade of an ancient oak, and she was grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. "Since I was 15, Kenneth said. "Grew up on a small farm in Missouri, but after the war my family lost everything. I headed west to make my own way." "The war," Josephine did some mental math. If he was 15 right after the Civil War ended in 1865, that would make him around 32 now. A decade older than her, but not so much that it seemed strange they were talking so easily. "I was too young to fight, but my older brothers were not. Only one came home, and he was never the same after." Kenneth's voice was matter-of-fact, but Josephine could hear the old pain underneath. "Anyway, I learned that I was good with horses and cattle, and I have been doing this ever since." "Do you ever want to settle down, own your own place?" She was not sure why she was asking such personal questions, except that the long ride and the strange intimacy of the situation seemed to encourage honesty. Kenneth looked out at the hills, his eyes distant. "I used to think I did, saved up money for it, even looked at some land. But then I would see people get too attached to one piece of ground, and it would destroy them when things went wrong. Drought, disease, debt. Seems safer to keep moving." "That sounds lonely," Josephine said quietly. He turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time that day. "Maybe it is, but at least I do not hurt anyone but myself that way." There was something in his tone that made Josephine think he was talking about more than just land ownership. Before she could ask, he stood and offered her a hand up. "We should keep moving. Want to reach the ranch before dark." They rode in companionable silence for the next few hours. Josephine found herself studying Kenneth when she thought he was not looking. He sat his horse like he was part of the animal, moving with it instead of fighting against it. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with fine lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He had smiled a few times during their ride, usually at something small like a hawk riding the thermals or a jackrabbit bounding across their path. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. The question had been building in her mind since last night. "You did not know me. You risked your life savings and possibly a fight with Hutchins." "Why?" Kenneth was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I had a sister once, younger than me. When things got bad after the war, a man came around offering to take her east, said he would get her a job as a housemaid with a good family. My mother was desperate, and the man seemed respectable, so she agreed." "What happened?" Josephine asked, though part of her did not want to know. "We never saw my sister again. Found out later the man was running a prostitution ring out of St. Louis. By the time we learned the truth, It was too late to find her. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were tight on the reins. I swore after that I would never stand by and watch someone else's sister or daughter get taken by a man with bad intentions. I am sorry, Josephine said. The words felt inadequate, but she did not know what else to say. Not your fault, Kenneth replied. But when I walked into that saloon and saw what was happening, I saw my sister. Saw what might have happened if someone had been there to stop it. So I stopped it. They did not talk much after that, but something had shifted between them. Josephine felt like she understood Kenneth Garrett a little better now, understood the code that drove him to do what he did. He was not just a drifting cowboy. He was a man trying to make amends for something that was never his fault to begin with. The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a hill and saw the McGraw Ranch spread out below them. It was bigger than Josephine had expected, with a large main house, several barns, and numerous corrals. Cattle dotted the fields, and she could see men moving among them, doing the evening chores. That is home for the next few months, Kenneth said. The McGraws are good people, fair employers, and they treat their workers right. Clara can be a bit stern, but she's got a kind heart under the tough exterior. They rode down to the main house, where a woman was waiting on the porch. Clara McGraw was in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple calico dress with an apron, and there was flour on her hands. "Kenneth Garrett," she called out, "you are cutting it close. Expected you this morning." "Ran into some complications in town," Kenneth said, dismounting and helping Josephine down. "Clara, this is Josephine Davies. I mentioned in my last letter that you were looking for household help." Clara's eyes narrowed as she studied Josephine. "Did you now? I do not recall that letter." "Must have gotten lost," Kenneth said smoothly, "but the need is still there, is not it? And Miss Davies is a hard worker who needs a place to stay." Clara looked between them, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "Inside, both of you, and you better explain what is really going on here." The ranch house kitchen was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Clara poured coffee for all of them, then sat down and fixed Kenneth with a look that probably made grown men confess to crimes they had not committed. Kenneth told the story, leaving out nothing. Josephine watched Clara's expression shift from suspicion to anger to something that might have been approval. "Samuel Hutchins is a snake," Clara said when Kenneth finished. "Always has been. My husband has had trouble with him trying to undercut our contracts and spread rumors about our cattle being diseased. Good riddance if you ruined his reputation, Kenneth." "So Josephine can stay?" Kenneth asked. Clara turned her attention to Josephine. "You know how to cook, clean, sew?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me all of those things. I have been taking care of my father and myself since she passed 2 years ago." Josephine sat up straighter, meeting Clara's eyes. "I will not pretend I am the best cook in California, but I am competent and I learn fast. I will earn my keep." "I am sure you will," Clara said. "The work is hard. I need help with 3 meals a day for anywhere from 15 to 20 men, depending on the season. Laundry, mending, cleaning. During branding and cattle drives, the days start before dawn and end after dark. You think you can handle that?" "I know I can," Josephine said firmly. Clara smiled for the first time, transforming her stern face into something warmer. "Good. You will bunk in the small room off the kitchen. Wages are $20 a month plus room and board. We pay at the end of every month, no exceptions. You work hard, we will treat you fair. You slack off, you will be on the first stage back to Stockton." "Clear, crystal clear, madam." "Stop calling me madam, makes me feel ancient. Clara is fine." She stood up, brushing flour from her apron. "Kenneth, get her bag and show her to the room." "Miss Davies, you can start tomorrow morning. Tonight, just get settled." Kenneth carried Josephine's bag to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. A window looked out over the eastern fields, where the last light of day was painting everything gold and red. "Thank you," Josephine said. "Again. I seem to keep saying that to you." "You do not owe me thanks," Kenneth said. "Just work hard and build a good life for yourself. That will be thanks enough." He turned to leave, and Josephine felt a sudden panic at the thought of him walking away. "Will I see you around the ranch?" Kenneth paused in the doorway. "I will be here for the next few months at least. The cattle drive does not start until late October, and there is plenty of work to do before then. So yes, you will see me around." "Good," Josephine said, and meant it more than she expected. Over the next few weeks, Josephine settled into the rhythm of ranch life. The work was every bit as hard as Clara had promised, but it was also satisfying in a way that surprised her. There was something honest about waking before dawn to start breakfast, about feeding men who worked themselves to exhaustion and watching their faces light up when the food was good. Clara was a demanding teacher, but a patient one, showing Josephine tricks for managing the heavy work and ways to make simple ingredients stretch to feed a crowd. The other ranch hands accepted her presence with varying degrees of curiosity and approval. Most of them were respectful, keeping their distance and their comments appropriate. The few who tried to push boundaries found themselves on the receiving end of Clara's sharp tongue or, once, Kenneth's quiet but unmistakable warning. That incident happened about 3 weeks after Josephine arrived. She was carrying a basket of laundry out to the clothesline when one of the younger hands, a cocky kid named Billy, stepped into her path. "Need some help with that, pretty lady?" he asked, standing too close. "I am fine, thank you," Josephine said, trying to step around him. Billy moved with her, blocking her path again. "Come on now, do not be unfriendly. All I am asking for is a smile." "And I am asking you to move," Josephine said more firmly. "What is going on here?" Kenneth's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He had been working in the nearby corral and must have seen the interaction. Billy stepped back quickly. "Nothing, just being friendly." Kenneth walked over, and though he was not particularly tall, something about the way he moved made him seem larger. "Miss Davies said to move. In my experience, when a lady says no, she means no. You understand me, Billy?" "Yeah, sure, I understand," Billy muttered, then hurried off toward the barn. Josephine let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You did not have to do that. I could have handled him." "I know you could have," Kenneth said, "but you should not have to. A man should know how to behave around a lady without needing someone to remind him." He started to walk away, but Josephine called after him. "Kenneth, would you like to take a walk after dinner? I have barely seen the ranch beyond the house and the immediate yard." Kenneth turned back, surprise flickering across his face. "You sure? You work long days. Must be tired." "I am always tired," Josephine said with a small smile, "but I would still like to see more of the ranch and maybe talk to someone who is not discussing the proper way to render lard." Kenneth laughed, a sound she had not heard from him before. It changed his whole face, making him look younger and less guarded. "All right then. After dinner." That evening, after the dishes were washed and put away, Josephine found Kenneth waiting by the corral. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He had cleaned up from the day's work, his hair damp and his shirt changed to a cleaner one. They walked toward the eastern pasture, where the land rose toward the distant mountains. The air was cooling rapidly now that the sun was down, and Josephine wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "How are you settling in?" Kenneth asked. "Better than I expected," Josephine admitted. "The work is hard, but I like feeling useful. Clara is teaching me so much, and the men are mostly respectful. It is a good place. I am glad. Kenneth was quiet for a moment, then said, I have been meaning to tell you I asked around in town last week. Your father is still in Stockton, still drinking, but at least he is alive. Josephine felt a complicated wave of emotions. Relief that her father was not dead. Sadness that he was still destroying himself. Anger that he had put her in this position in the first place. Thank you for checking on him. I know I should feel more, but I just feel numb when I think about him. That is understandable, Kenneth said. Sometimes the people we love hurt us so badly that we have to protect ourselves by feeling nothing. It is not wrong. It is survival. They walked in silence for a while, their steps matching naturally. Josephine found herself acutely aware of Kenneth's presence beside her, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers, the sound of his breathing. Can I ask you something personal? She said finally. You can ask. Cannot promise I will answer. Have you ever been in love? Kenneth was quiet for so long she thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, once. A long time ago. Her name was Margaret, and she was the daughter of a ranch owner I worked for down in the San Joaquin Valley. We courted for about 6 months, and I thought maybe I had found a reason to stop drifting. What happened? Her father found out and fired me on the spot. Said his daughter was not going to marry some no-account cowboy with nothing to his name. Margaret did not fight for me, just accepted her father's decision. I realized she had been more in love with the idea of rebelling than with me. He glanced at Josephine. That was 10 years ago. Have not let myself get close to anyone since. That sounds lonely, Josephine said softly. Safer than getting hurt again, Kenneth replied. Then he seemed to catch himself. Why are you asking? Josephine was not sure how to answer. The truth was that she had been thinking about Kenneth constantly since arriving at the ranch. The way he moved, the way he spoke to the horses with such gentleness, the way he had stood up for her without expecting anything in return. She was developing feelings for him, and that terrified her because she had no idea if he felt the same way. Just curious, she said finally. You are a hard man to figure out, Kenneth Garrett, he smiled. And you are easier. Probably not, she admitted. They had reached a small rise that offered a view of the entire ranch spread out below them. Lights were flickering on in the bunkhouse and the main house. It looked peaceful, like a painting. Can I tell you something? Of course. I have never felt as free as I do right now. Even with the hard work, even with everything that happened, I feel like I can finally breathe for the first time in 2 years. Maybe longer. And a lot of that is because of you. Kenneth looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very blue. Josephine, I am not asking for anything, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know. You changed my life, and I will always be grateful for that. It is not about being grateful, Kenneth said quietly. He took a step closer, and Josephine's heart began to race. I need you to understand that. You do not owe me anything. But if I am being honest, and I figure I should be, I have been thinking about you a lot these past few weeks. More than I should be, probably. Why should not you be thinking about me? Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I am a drifter with no real home and no real future beyond the next job. Because you deserve better than someone like me. Because I swore I would not let myself feel this way about anyone again. He ran a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. But then you smile at me across the dinner table, or you laugh at something one of the hands says, and I forget all the reasons why this is a bad idea. Josephine reached out and took his hand. It was rough with calluses, warm and solid in hers. What if I do not think it is a bad idea? What if I think you are exactly the kind of man I want to know better? Kenneth looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. You really mean that? I do not say things I do not mean, Josephine replied. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made her breath catch. "Then maybe we should see where this goes. Slow and careful, no rushing, just two people getting to know each other." "I would like that," Josephine said. Kenneth raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Josephine felt warmth spread through her entire body. They stood there on the hill as the last light faded from the sky, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. About their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. It was the first of many such conversations, and Josephine felt something taking root in her heart that she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The next few months passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Kenneth and Josephine were careful not to be too obvious about their growing relationship, both because it was still new and fragile, and because Clara had very definite opinions about ranch hands and household staff fraternizing. But they found ways to be together. Walks after dinner became routine. Kenneth started volunteering to help bring in firewood or fix things around the house, tasks that gave him excuses to be near Josephine. She began packing extra good things in his lunch pail, tucking in cookies or an extra slice of pie. Clara, of course, noticed everything. One afternoon in late October, as Josephine was kneading bread dough, Clara came into the kitchen and closed the door behind her. "Sit down, girl. We need to talk." Josephine felt her stomach drop. "Have I done something wrong?" "Depends on your perspective," Clara said, pouring 2 cups of coffee and sliding one across the table. "I have eyes, Josephine. I see how you and Kenneth look at each other, how he finds excuses to be around the house, how you light up when he walks into a room." "I am sorry," Josephine began, but Clara held up a hand. "I am not finished. I also see that you are both being respectful about it. No sneaking around in the middle of the night, no shirking your duties. That counts for something." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Kenneth Garrett is a good man, one of the best I have known. But he is also a wanderer, and wanderers do not always settle down, even when they have a reason to." "I know that," Josephine said quietly. "We have talked about it. Neither of us is making promises we cannot keep." "That is wise," Clara said. "But wisdom does not always protect the heart. I have seen how you look at him, girl. You are falling in love with him if you have not already fallen, and I would hate to see you hurt when the cattle drive ends and he decides to move on to the next job." "Do you think he will leave?" Josephine asked, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. Clara sighed. "I do not know. Kenneth has worked this ranch on and off for 5 years now. He always comes back, but he also always leaves. The question is whether you are enough to make him want to stay for good, and that is something only he can answer." That conversation haunted Josephine over the following weeks. The cattle drive was scheduled to start in mid-November, a massive undertaking that would take most of the ranch hands away for nearly 3 weeks. Kenneth would be going with them, of course. He was one of the most experienced drovers on the ranch. After the drive, the men would return for the winter, but come spring, many of them would move on to other jobs and other ranches. Would Kenneth be one of them? She tried to push the worry aside and just enjoy the time they had together. Kenneth seemed more relaxed lately, laughing more easily and talking about things beyond the present day. He told her stories about his travels, the places he had seen and the people he had met. Josephine shared her own dreams, things she had never spoken aloud before. She wanted to have a home of her own someday, she told him. A place where she felt safe and rooted. She wanted children, maybe 3 or 4. She wanted a garden and chickens and a life that felt permanent. "That sounds nice," Kenneth said one evening as they sat on the porch steps watching the stars come out. "Real nice. Is it something you think you would ever want?" Josephine asked carefully. Kenneth was quiet. "I always thought I would end up alone, figured that was just my fate." But lately I have been thinking maybe I was wrong about that. What changed? Josephine's heart was hammering. He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. You changed. Meeting you, getting to know you, it made me realize that maybe running from place to place is not safer. Maybe it is just lonely, like you said that first day, and maybe I am tired of being lonely. Kenneth, I am not good with words, he interrupted. Never have been. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It scares me because I have not felt this way in so long, but it is real. And when this cattle drive is over, I want to come back here, not just to the ranch, but to you, if you will have me. Josephine felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were happy tears. Of course I will have you. I love you, Kenneth Garrett. I think I have loved you since that night in the saloon when you tore up that deed. Kenneth cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I love you too, Josephine Davies, more than I thought I could love anyone. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Josephine felt like every bad thing that had happened in her life had led her to this moment, to this man, to this feeling of absolute rightness. They sat on those porch steps for hours, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright and possible. The cattle drive departed on a cold November morning. Josephine stood with Clara and watched the men ride out, a massive herd of cattle moving like a brown river across the landscape. Kenneth turned in his saddle before they crested the first hill, raising his hand in farewell. Josephine waved back, fighting the urge to run after him and beg him not to go. He will come back, Clara said firmly. That boy is head over heels for you. Anyone with eyes can see it. I hope you are right, Josephine said. The weeks that followed were long and lonely. Josephine threw herself into her work, keeping busy from dawn until well past dark. She and Clara Deep cleaned every inch of the ranch house, mended every piece of clothing in the mending basket, and prepared for the men's return by baking pies and cakes that they stored in the cold cellar. In the evenings, Josephine would sit in her small room and reread the single letter Kenneth had managed to send from one of the supply stops. It was not a long letter, just a few lines telling her the drive was going well and that he missed her. But she treasured it like gold, running her fingers over the words he had written. 20 days after the drive started, the men returned. Josephine heard the commotion from the kitchen and ran outside, her heart in her throat. The cattle were being driven into the holding pens, and the men were dismounting, tired and dirty and grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. She spotted Kenneth immediately. He was covered in trail dust, his beard grown out and his clothes filthy, but he had never looked better to her. Their eyes met across the yard and he smiled. Then he was striding toward her and she was running to meet him, propriety be damned. He caught her up in his arms, lifting her off her feet and holding her tight. I missed you, he said against her hair. God, I missed you. I missed you too, Josephine said, not caring that he was getting her clean dressed dusty. So much. Behind them, someone let out a wolf whistle and several of the men started laughing and making comments. Kenneth set her down gently, his face slightly red. Guess the secret is out, he said. Guess so, Josephine agreed, but she could not stop smiling. That night, after everyone had eaten and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Kenneth found Josephine on the porch. He had cleaned up, his beard trimmed and his clothes changed, and he was holding something small in his hand. I want to show you something, he said. Come with me. They walked out to the barn where Kenneth lit a lantern. In its warm glow, Josephine could see he had set up a blanket on a pile of clean hay. It was private here, away from the house and the bunkhouse. I know this is not fancy, Kenneth said nervously, but I wanted to do this properly and I wanted it to be private. Do what properly? Josephine asked, though her heart was already racing with hope, Kenneth took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee. He opened his hand, revealing a simple gold ring with a small blue stone. "This was my mother's, only thing I have left of her. It is not much, but it is real gold and the stone is a real sapphire. Josephine Davies, I know I am just a cowboy with not much to offer. But I love you with everything I have. Will you marry me?" Josephine's vision blurred with tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Kenneth stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her, deeper and more passionate than ever before, and Josephine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in Stockton's small church. Clara and her husband, Robert, stood as witnesses. Josephine had sent word to her father about the wedding, not really expecting him to show up. But when she walked down the aisle in a simple blue dress Clara had helped her sew, she saw Thomas Davies sitting in the back pew. He was thin and looked older than his years, but he was sober and clean for the first time in months. After the ceremony, he approached her hesitantly. "Josie, I know I have got no right to be here after what I did, but I wanted to see you happy. You deserve to be happy." Josephine looked at the man who had gambled her away in a poker game, who had chosen alcohol over his own daughter. Part of her wanted to turn away, to refuse to acknowledge him. But she also saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, and she thought about what Kenneth had said about forgiveness. "I am happy, Papa," she said. "Happier than I have been in a long time. I hope someday you can find that kind of happiness too." Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes. "I am trying, Josie. I have been sober for 2 weeks now, joined a temperance group at the Methodist church. It is hard, but I am trying." "That is good, Papa. I am proud of you for trying." She squeezed his hand briefly, then turned back to Kenneth. Her husband. The word sent a thrill through her. Kenneth had been watching the interaction closely, ready to step in if needed. But he seemed satisfied that Josephine was all right. He took her hand and led her to the small reception Clara had organized at the ranch house. The celebration was simple but joyful. Robert McGraw had slaughtered a pig for the occasion, and Clara had made a beautiful cake. The ranch hands toasted the newlyweds with cups of coffee and cider, sharing embarrassing stories about Kenneth that made Josephine laugh until her sides hurt. As the sun set and the party wound down, Kenneth and Josephine slipped away to the small cabin the McGraws had given them. It was about half a mile from the main house, a 2-room structure that Kenneth had spent the past few weeks fixing up. He had repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and built them a proper bed frame. Clara had donated linens and dishes, and some of the other ranch hands had contributed furniture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," Kenneth said, carrying her over the threshold. Josephine looked around the cabin, seeing it with fresh eyes. It was not much, but it was theirs. A place to start building the life they had talked about. "It is perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Josephine felt a peace she had never known before. Kenneth's arms were around her, his heart beat steady beneath her ear. This was where she belonged. This was home. The winter passed in a contented blur. Josephine continued working for the McGraws, though now Kenneth walked her to and from the main house each day. He had taken a permanent position on the ranch, with plans to eventually save enough to buy some land of their own. They talked about the future constantly, making plans and dreaming together. In February, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Kenneth, worried he might feel trapped or overwhelmed. But when she finally worked up the courage to share the news, his face lit up with such pure joy that all her fears vanished. "A baby," he said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. In September, I think," Josephine said. "Are you happy? Happy, Josie, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and excited and amazed all at once. He pulled her close. We are going to be parents. I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father, Josephine said, absolutely certain of it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara gave Josephine lighter duties as she grew bigger, and Kenneth hovered over her like a mother hen, making sure she did not overdo it. In September of 1883, after a long labor that left Josephine exhausted but exhilarated, they welcomed their son into the world. They named him Thomas Kenneth Garrett, after both of their fathers. He was a healthy baby with Kenneth's blue eyes and Josephine's dark hair. Holding him for the first time, Josephine felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. This was her family. Her real family. Thomas Davies came to meet his grandson when the baby was 2 weeks old. He had maintained his sobriety and was working as a clerk at the general store in Stockton. The meeting was awkward at first, but when Josephine placed baby Thomas in her father's arms, something in the older man's face softened. "He is beautiful, Josie," Thomas said quietly. "Just beautiful. Thank you for letting me be part of his life." "Everyone deserves a second chance, Papa," Josephine said. "Just do not waste this one." "I will not," her father promised. "I swear I will not." Over the next few years, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kenneth and Josephine had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose in 1885 and another son named James in 1887. The cabin grew crowded, but it was a happy kind of crowded, full of laughter and love. In 1888, the McGraws offered to sell Kenneth and Josephine 50 acres of ranch land at a price they could afford. It was on the eastern edge of the property, good grazing land with a creek running through it. Kenneth accepted immediately, and they began planning their own small ranch. Building their house took the better part of a year. Kenneth did most of the work himself, with help from the other ranch hands on their days off. It was not a large house, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built. Josephine planted a garden and got chickens, just like she had dreamed about. They bought a small herd of cattle and some horses. It was hard work, but it was theirs. On a warm evening in May of 1889, Josephine stood on the porch of their new home, watching Kenneth teach young Thomas how to rope a fence post. Rose was playing in the dirt nearby, making elaborate mud pies. Baby James was asleep in his cradle inside. The sun was setting, painting everything golden, and Josephine felt such a wave of contentment that it almost hurt. Kenneth looked up and caught her watching. He grinned and walked over, dusty and sweaty but happy. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we have come," Josephine said. 7 years ago, I was a girl whose father had gambled her away in a poker game. I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning and I did not even know it. Kenneth put his arm around her. "I think about that night in the saloon sometimes. About how close I came to walking out and not getting involved. What if I had done that? What if I had just minded my own business?" "But you did not," Josephine said. "You saw someone who needed help and you helped her. You did not just win me back from Hutchins that night. You gave me my whole life back." "We gave each other our lives," Kenneth corrected. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, a reason to build something permanent." "So we saved each other," Josephine said. "I guess we did." Kenneth kissed her temple. "I love you, Josephine Garrett, more every day." "I love you too," she said. "Always." They stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the fading light. Behind them was the house they had built with their own hands. Around them was the land they were working to make prosper. Ahead of them was a future full of possibilities. Josephine thought about the deed Kenneth had torn up that night in the saloon. That piece of paper was supposed to have made her property, something to be owned and used. Instead, tearing it up had set her free. Free to choose her own path. Free to love and be loved. Free to build a life that mattered. Years later, when Josephine was an old woman surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, people would ask her about that night in Stockton. About the father who gambled her away, and the cowboy who won her back. She would tell them the story, not leaving out the painful parts or the frightening parts, because those parts mattered too. But she always ended the story the same way, her aged hand reaching for Kenneth's across the porch swing they still sat on every evening. "He tore up that deed," she would say, "and in doing so, he gave me the only thing I ever really needed. A chance to choose my own destiny, and I chose him. Every day for the rest of our lives, I chose him." And Kenneth, equally old and still just as besotted with his wife as he had been that first day, would squeeze her hand and say, "Best decision I ever made was walking into that saloon. Second best was tearing up that paper. But the absolute best was loving you all these years." Their children would smile and roll their eyes at the old romantic story they had heard 100 times. But they would also look at their own spouses and children and think about legacy, about how one moment of courage and kindness could change not just 2 lives, but generations to come. Thomas Kenneth Garrett grew up to be a rancher like his father, expanding their original 50 acres into a successful operation that supported his own family. Rose married a teacher from San Francisco and moved to the city, but she visited often and named her firstborn daughter Josephine. James became a veterinarian, one of the first in the region, and used his skills to help ranchers throughout the valley. Thomas Davies maintained his sobriety until his death in 1895. In his final days, with Josephine holding his hand, he apologized one last time for that night in the saloon. Josephine forgave him, truly and completely, because she had learned that holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it. Her father had made a terrible mistake, but he had spent his remaining years trying to make amends. That had to count for something. Samuel Hutchins, the man who had tried to claim Josephine as property, faded into obscurity. His ranch failed within a few years, undone by drought and poor management. He left California in 1886 and was never heard from again. Josephine thought about him sometimes, wondering what made a man so cruel that he would try to own another human being. But mostly she felt pity for him, for the emptiness that must have driven such actions. The McGraws remained close friends with the Garretts for the rest of their lives. Clara became a surrogate grandmother to the Garrett children, teaching Rose how to bake and telling all 3 children stories about the old days. When Robert McGraw died in 1892, Kenneth helped Clara run the ranch until she decided to sell it and move to town. She lived until 1901, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, but that was all in the future. On that evening in May of 1889, Kenneth and Josephine simply stood on their porch and watched the sun set over their land. They did not know what challenges lay ahead. They did not know about the drought that would test them in 1891, or the difficult birth that would nearly take Josephine's life when she had their 4th child, a daughter named Clara, in 1890. They did not know about the joy of watching their children grow and thrive, or the pride of seeing their ranch prosper. All they knew was that they had each other, and that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Kenneth scooped up Rose while Josephine gathered Thomas. They went inside together, a family united by love and choice. The house smelled of the stew Josephine had made for dinner, and the fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Tell us a story, Papa," Thomas begged as they settled in for the evening. Kenneth glanced at Josephine and smiled. How about I tell you about the night I met your mama? About how she was the bravest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and how I knew from the moment I looked into her eyes that my drifting days were over. We have heard that one before, Rose said, but she was smiling. Well, it is a good story, Kenneth said. The best story I know. Because it is true, every word of it. And so he told it again, the story of the woman whose father gambled her away and the cowboy who won her back by tearing up a deed. He told it with love and honesty, not sugar-coating the hard parts, but emphasizing the hope and courage that had carried them through. Josephine listened, nursing baby James and watching her family around the fire. This was happiness, she thought. Not the absence of hardship or sorrow, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. Kenneth had given her so much more than freedom that night in the saloon. He had given her a future, a family, a home, and she had given him the same thing. Two people who had every reason to give up on happiness had instead chosen to fight for it, to build it with their own hands. That was the real story, the one that mattered most. As Thomas and Rose finally drifted off to sleep and Kenneth carried them to their beds, Josephine sat in the quiet house and thought about the strange paths life took. 7 years ago, she had stood outside a saloon, terrified and alone. Now she sat in her own home, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world. Kenneth returned and sat beside her, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Josephine said softly, "and nothing. Just how grateful I am for all of this. For you." "Me too," Kenneth said. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that I walked into that saloon. Grateful that I was brave enough to stand up to Hutchins. Grateful that you said yes when I asked you to come to the ranch. Grateful for every moment that led us here." "You think we will always be this happy?" Josephine asked. Kenneth considered the question seriously. "I think we will have hard times. That is just life. But I also think that as long as we face those hard times together, we will find our way back to happiness. Because what we have, Josie, what we built together, it is strong enough to last." He was right, Josephine knew. They would face challenges. Some years the cattle prices would be low. Some years the weather would not cooperate. They would deal with sick children and difficult neighbors and all the thousand small trials that came with living. But they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. "I love you, Kenneth Garrett," she said, the words as true and powerful as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you too, Josephine Garrett," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." They sat together in the firelight, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of what might have been. The night grew deeper around their small house, but inside there was warmth and light and love. Always love. And when they finally went to bed, curled together in the darkness with their children sleeping safely nearby, Josephine thought about that deed one last time. The paper that was supposed to have defined her fate, reduced her to property. Kenneth had torn it up without hesitation, destroying the false claim and giving her back her autonomy, her choice, her life. It was, she thought as sleep claimed her, the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. Not just freedom, but the chance to choose love. And she had chosen well. They both had. The story of the girl whose father gambled her away and the cowboy who won her back would be told and retold through generations of Garretts. It would become family legend, a testament to courage and love, and the power of doing what was right even when it was difficult. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about that night in Stockton, about the torn deed and the new beginning it represented. But for Kenneth and Josephine, it was not a legend or a story. It was simply their life, the foundation on which they had built everything that mattered. And as they grew old together, their love never wavering through all the years and all the challenges, They knew they had made the right choice that night in 1882. They had chosen each other, and that choice had made all the difference.